Anomalous Weather by William C. The alarm began early in the morning for you. Your mother and father gathered around the television with you as the blaring beep sprung out. The robot voice holds ultimate authority now. This is a severe weather alert being broadcasted at the request of the National Weather Service. At approximately 0700 hours CST, an unusual tropical storm is located 900 miles off the east coast of the United States. The storm is unusual as it appears to be made up of canine appendages, tissues, and is rapidly approaching inland with significant turbulence. All residents are advised to stay inside and barricade doors and windows if unable to evacuate within the next 4 hours. The storm speed has considerable force, and damage inflicted on the raining dog parts have already been reported as far as Maine, Rhode Island, and Connecticut. Do not approach projectiles while they're still animate. Do not attempt to chase down runaway pets. A little confused, your parents look out the window. You live in Chicago, and indeed turbulent rain began to pelt the asphalt. But what is this about dogs? What does this have to do with anything? This is a continuous weather service alert being broadcast at the request of the National Weather Service. At approximately 0740 hours CST, the irregular tropical storm breached inland. The eye of the storm is currently above Pennsylvania, with turbulence exceeding as far as Chicago and South Carolina. Insulation of all openings, including doors, windows, and leading into your home, is recommended. Citizens owning any domestic canines are urgently requested to leave them outside. Do not let them in. Ignore any and all vocalizations, intelligible or otherwise. Your blood starts to turn cold. Is this a sick joke? It has to be. Someone must have hijacked the broadcast. During a storm, of all things. What fucking nerve. You don't quite notice it yet that the sky outside is darkened and has turned a mushy shade of red. Somewhere down the street, a woman faintly shrieks. The rain is getting heavier. This is a continuous, severe weather alert being broadcast at the request of the National Weather Service. This broadcast will continue until all severely anomalous weather has ceased. Isolate all domestic canines. Do not let them in. Seal every crack leading to the inside. Ignore all vocalizations from outside until the storm has passed. If possible, send your loved ones to the lower level of your home. Do not leave your home. Do not leave your home. Do not leave your home. Thick, heavy impacts can be heard from outside. Cautiously, your father goes to open the front door window for a crack and see how it is. As he does, you watch in absolute horror as a grimy red paw somehow worms its way underneath the door. It's muddy and viscous, and bone shines from underneath the fur. The scratching and howling that accompanies it is unbearable. It's impossible. The Smiling Man by Blue Title. About 5 years ago, I lived downtown in a major city in the US. I've always been a night person, so I would often find myself bored after my roommate, who was decidedly not a night person, went to sleep. To pass the time, I used to go for long walks and spend the time thinking. I spent 4 years like that, walking alone at night, and never once had a reason to feel afraid. I always used to joke with my roommate that even the drug dealers in the city were polite, but that all changed after a few minutes of one evening. It was a Wednesday, somewhere between 1 and 2 in the morning, and I was walking near a police-patrolled park quite a ways away from the apartment. It was a quiet night, even for the weekend, with very little traffic and almost no one on foot. The park, as it was most nights, was completely empty. I turned down a short side street to loop back to my apartment. That's when I first noticed him. At the far end of the street on my side was the silhouette of a man, dancing. It was a strange dance too, similar to a waltz. But he finished each box with a forward stride. I guess you could say he was dance walking, headed straight for me. Deciding that he was probably drunk, I stepped as close as I could to the road to give him a majority of the sidewalk to pass by me. The closer he got, the more I realized how gracefully he was moving. He was very tall and lanky, and he was wearing an old suit. He danced closer still, until I could make out his face. His eyes were open wide and wild, head tilted back slightly, looking off into the sky. His mouth formed a painfully wide cartoon smile. Between his eyes and the smile, I decided to cross the street just before he could dance any closer to me. I took my eyes off him to cross the empty street. As I reached the other side, I glanced back, and then stopped, dead in my tracks. He had stopped dancing too, and was standing with one foot in the street, perfectly parallel to me. He was facing me, but still looking skywards, smile still on his lips. I was completely and utterly unnerved by this. I started walking again, but kept my eyes on the man. He didn't move. Once I put about half a block between us, I turned away for a moment to watch a sidewalk in front of me. The street and sidewalk ahead of me were completely empty. Still unnerved, I looked back to where the man had been standing, and he was gone. For the briefest of moments, I felt relieved, until I saw him. He had crossed the street and was now slightly crouched down. I couldn't tell for sure due to the distance and the shadows, but I was certain he was facing me. I had looked away from him for more than 10 seconds, so it was clear that he moved fast. I was so shocked by this that I stood there for some time, staring at him, and then he started moving towards me again. He took giant, exaggerated tiptoe steps, as if he were a cartoon character sneaking up on someone. Except he was moving very, very quickly. I'd like to say at this point that I ran or I pulled out my pepper spray or my cell phone or did anything at all, but I didn't. I just stood there, completely frozen, as the smiling man crept towards me. And then he stopped, about a car length away from me, still smiling his creepy smile, still just looking at the sky. When I finally found my voice, I blurted out the first thing that came to mind. What I meant to ask was, "What do you want?" in an angry, commanding tone. But what came out was just a whimper. "What?" Regardless of whether or not humans can smell fear, they can certainly hear it. I heard it in my own voice, and that only made me more afraid. But he didn't react at all. He just stood there, smiling. And then, after what felt like forever, he turned around, very slowly, and started dance walking away. Just like that. Not wanting to turn my back on him again, I just watched him go, until he was far enough to almost be out of sight. Then I realized something. He wasn't moving away anymore, nor was he dancing. I just watched in horror as the distant shape of him grew larger and larger. He was coming back my way. This time, he was running. I ran too. I ran until I was off the side street and back onto a better lit road with some sparse traffic. Looking behind me then, he was nowhere to be found. The rest of my way home, I kept glancing over my shoulder, always expecting to see that fucking smile. But he was never there. I lived in that city for about 6 months after that night. I never went out for another walk. There was something about his face that always haunted me. He didn't look drunk. He didn't look high. He looked completely and utterly insane. And that's a very, very scary thing to see. Subway Stare. Original author, unknown. A woman was sitting on the subway late one night, and she noticed the woman sitting across from her was staring intently at her. She pretended not to notice, but each time she glanced at the woman, the staring continued. At one of the stops, a new passenger got on and sat next to her. After a couple of minutes, he quietly told her that he thought that she should get off at the next stop, knowing that the next stop was a bit of a busy one. She agreed. When the stop came up, she left the train with the man. The man then said to her, "Thank God, I didn't mean to scare you, but you had to get off that train. The woman sitting opposite you was dead, and the two men on either side of her, they were propping her up." The Fourth Floor. Original author, unknown. In the apartment complex where I now live, there's a story about a girl who lived in one of the buildings. She lived on the 7th floor and used to come home late, because she was always working on her thesis and school was a bit far from her place. The story goes, every time she would take the elevator, it would stall on the 4th floor. The sliding doors wouldn't open or anything, but there would just be this feeling of pressure on the elevator, as if someone was going to step in and join her. Do you know the feeling of having someone stand next to you and stare at you, even though you couldn't see them? Apparently, this would happen to her each time. In fact, it got so bad one particular night. She asked her mother if she could go wait in the lobby for her and accompany her upstairs. Her mother, of course, agreed. The girl arrived home a little bit later than usual, like around 3 a.m. Thankfully, her mother was still in the lobby, waiting for her just like she promised. They entered the elevator together, and when the elevator paused on the 4th floor, the girl gave her mother a look and said, "See what I mean? It always happens." The older woman, in an effort to comfort her daughter, wrapped an arm around her shoulder and leaned in, right before whispering, "Do I really look like your mother?" The next day, they found the girl in the elevator, alone. She was dead. There were no marks on her body, and on her face was a look of pure horror. I'm a 911 operator, and I just had the most terrifying call. By Higgs Thunder. 911, what's your emergency?
Yeah, hi, this is gonna sound kinda strange, but there's a man stumbling around in circles in my front yard.
Could you repeat that, sir?
He looks sick or lost or drunk or something. I just woke up to get a glass of water and I heard the snow crunching around underneath my front window. So I peeked out. I'm looking at him now. He's about 10 yards away from my window. Something's definitely not right.
What's your address, sir?
1617 Quarry Lane in Pinella Pass.
I'm gonna send a squad car your way, but that's quite a ways out. Are you alone in the house, sir?
Yeah, I'm alone.
Can you confirm that all your doors and windows are locked? I want you to stay on the phone with me.
Yeah, I know my front door is definitely locked, but I'll go check the back door real quick. I really appreciate your help, by the way. I know this is kind of strange, but I really hope that...
Sir? Sir, are you still there?
He's still in the yard, but he's... What the fuck? He's upside down.
Sir, stay with me now. What's happening?
He's staring right at me, but he's standing on his hands now. He's perfectly still, just staring at me. He's doing a handstand and smiling at me. He's not moving.
He's doing a handstand, sir?
I don't know. Yeah, he's facing me, standing on his hands. He's got this huge smile and he's perfectly still. What the fuck? Please get someone out here now.
Sir, I need you to remain calm. I've put the call in and there's an officer on the way.
Oh my god, his teeth are huge. What the fuck? Please help me.
Sir, I want you to try and keep an eye on him, but make sure your back door is locked again. We need to make sure all access points are secure. Can you talk me through to confirm that your door is locked?
Okay, I'm walking backwards now, keeping him in sight. My hand is on the doorknob now. It's locked. I need to check the deadbolt, so I'm gonna take my eyes off him for a split second.
Alright, sir. Help is on the way. Just stay on the phone with me. Everything's gonna be alright. Sir? Sir? Sir, are you still there?
His face. It's up against the glass.
Sir, I need you to speak up. What's happening?
I looked away for a split second, and now his face that's pressed up against my front window. His teeth are huge and he's still smiling. There's no color in his eyes. Jesus Christ, please help me. Why won't it fucking just move?
Sir, I need you to go into the nearest room and lock yourself inside of it. Do you have a basement or a bedroom that you can lock yourself in?
He won't stop staring. He's gonna hurt me.
Sir, I need you to listen to me. Lock yourself somewhere safe until officers arrive at your house. Can you hear me? Yes. I'm gonna lock myself in my room. Are you positive you're alone in the house, correct?
Yes, I'm definitely alone in the house. Wait a minute. He's moving. He's shaking his head. He's telling me no. I think he can hear us. He's telling me I'm not alone.
Sir? Sir, are you still there? I heard a loud noise. Is everything all right? Sir? Alright, this is a very urgent update, so I'll get right to it. I pulled some strings with my colleagues in the department, and I was able to obtain a copy of the police report that the officer filed in regards to the call I got 2 weeks ago. I've got to be extremely careful about covering up the officer's personal information. The investigation is still ongoing, and there's been some weird stuff happening. You'll see what I mean below. The police and news department are in a frenzy trying to keep the details quiet, for now. And there's a palpable feeling of uneasiness circulating around the town. If my bosses find out that I'm posting this here, I lose my job. So be it. This is the only official statement being released to the public tomorrow morning. The Ashland Police Department advises all homes and businesses within a 5-mile radius of 1617 Quarry Lane, Pinella Pass, to secure all doors and windows and by any extra security measures available, effective immediately. A curfew is in effect for all citizens in and around the city of Ashland. All persons found on the streets after sundown will be held in questions in regard to any suspicious activity. A police barrier has been placed around the perimeter of the quarry in northwest Ashland. No one is allowed to enter this restricted zone until further notice. Any and all persons found attempting to enter this restricted zone will be subdued on sight. Officers have been ordered to use force at their own discretion. There will be no exceptions. And here is the transcript of the actual police report filed by the officer that arrived on the scene. I don't know how my friend got a copy of this, and honestly, I don't want to know. Begin report. Officer number... approached the premises of 1617 Pinella Pass at 4:37 a.m. on February 9, 2015, in response to a 911 dispatch report of a suspicious person. The officer immediately noted that there were no lights on in the house, and there was also no response after the officer repeatedly knocked on the door, trying to identify himself. Officer number then noted a series of erratic footprints and handprints in the snow leading up to the home's bay window. Officer number noted no evidence of forced entry into the home or through the bay window. Upon examining the rear of the house, Officer number noted another set of footprints leading from the edge of the quarry, approximately 20 yards from the house, leading directly towards the back of the home. The prints were spaced extraordinarily far apart, indicating that the individual was able to cover an immense amount of ground in relatively few strides. The officer then noticed a series of marks, presumed to be hand and footprints, leading directly up the aluminum siding of the house, ending immediately under the third-floor attic window. The officers then noted that the attic window appeared to have been broken from the outside. There were no ladders or cable visible to have assisted the invader in reaching the third story. Author's note: on the copy of the report I have, the sergeant of our department circled this section and wrote in the margin, "What the hell? Investigation and verification needed immediately." Upon completion of the officer's survey, and his inability to enter the home without a lawful warrant, Officer number began slowly driving away in his squad car at approximately 4:43 a.m. He was calling the station to report his findings. He claims to have witnessed several pale, smiling faces in every window of the house, each wearing an expression that he later described as eager and amused curiosity. End report. As I said, the city issued curfews and information about the restricted zones will be announced tomorrow, but I thought I would alert everyone here first. As far as I know, the exact detail about the report being held in confidentiality because, as you can see, there are some unsettling things surrounding this entire incident. Author's note: as I was uploading this information, another coworker friend of mine from the emergency dispatch staff called to inform me that the officer that was called to the scene has gone missing. You will definitely hear about that tomorrow. If you live anywhere near the area, police units from nearby counties are being brought on to assist with the search. I say this as a dispatcher. Please take these ordinances seriously and report any suspicious finding to the authorities. According to my friend, the officer's wife was the last person to have seen him. Apparently, he was leaving their home. He muttered something about wanting to check that house out again. Dumbwaiter. Original author, unknown. Our new house was an old house. We spent tons of money on renovations and upgrades before we could even live there. The basement was particularly heinous. After a while, it started to come around, looking less like a pit of despair from when we bought it to more of a man cave. Once everything was done, we finally moved in. One of the kids was poking around in her closet the other day, and she discovered an old dumbwaiter. I never knew we even had one of those. It led down into the basement, but apparently the compartment was bricked up before we even moved in. When setting up my man cave down there, I just plastered over the old brick like any other wall. My daughter was pretty disappointed when I told her I wasn't going to break down the wall and make the thing functional again. She wanted to send me little presents from her room while I was in the basement watching the game. Still though, she liked hanging out in her closets and pulling the thing up and down. I figured there were worse things that she could find interesting. During one of the worst snowstorms I can remember, we were all bored and stuck inside the house. The two girls were playing in their room while my wife and I were trying to read in the dim light coming in from the outside. The power had gone out about 3 hours earlier. living in the middle of nowhere has its aesthetic perks, but definitely a trade-off to the luxury apartments. The kids were using the dumbwaiter, as always, sending one of their dolls up and down, making up a little story as they did it, and then they would rescue the doll. As they pulled it back up from the bowels of the house, I heard a little bump. Turns out one of the kids accidentally bottomed out in the basement. Then they pulled it back up. The youngest one screamed. I didn't even flinch. They were 4 and 7. They're always screaming. But then her sister started in and didn't stop. My wife and I ran up the stairs and the girls were backed up against the far side of the wall. They were wailing and crying. I tried to ask them what was wrong, but they were just inconsolable. The older one pointed at the closet. I went inside and looked. Inside the dumbwaiter compartment was their pet hamster. Only really, really messed up. Its eyes were completely removed from the sockets, and all of its guts were pushed out its backside. My wife tried to comfort the girls, and they'd at least stop screaming. They kept saying they never put the hamster in the elevator. That's what they called it. And he never left his cage. We didn't bother to chastise them for lying at that point. They were obviously way too upset. My mind was elsewhere, though. I was trying to figure out what the hell happened to the hamster. It was inside the compartment, so it couldn't have gotten crushed underneath when it dropped. It almost looked like the poor thing got put in a vice and then squeezed to death. We let the kids sleep in our room that night. The power was still out. My thoughts kept going to that hamster. There had to be a reason for it. I grabbed the flashlight beside my table and tiptoed over to the kids' sleeping bags and went in their room. The closet door was still open. I quietly worked the dumbwaiter up and down, and on the third trip down, I felt the rope shudder when I accidentally struck the bottom. I hoped it didn't wake anyone up. Very carefully, I pulled it back up. I thought it had gotten caught on something. It was heavier than it should have been. I gradually got it up to the top without making any more noise. Then I locked the braking handle and opened the door. The empty eye sockets of my younger daughter gaped at me as she stumbled out of the dumbwaiter, her entrails sliding out behind her. The Backrooms. Author, unknown. It was approximately 12:15 when I entered the Johnson County Community Health Clinic. I was there for an appointment I had set up weeks ago. Just a routine checkup. This wasn't a new place for me. I've been here a couple of times before. However, the place had an odd nostalgic feeling to it, as if it were a location from my childhood or something. I could never pinpoint exactly why that feeling was, or where it came from. As I walked in, I had an overwhelming feeling of deja vu. The hum and the flickering of the fluorescent lights, the white tile flooring, and the muted beige paint on the walls. I noticed that there was a TV mounted in the corner, a smaller flat screen. It was playing a short PowerPoint slideshow loop of ads and events that were being held by the clinic. I passed the empty waiting room, a small area in the main room with magazines, children's playthings, and blue cushioned chairs. And I approached the woman sitting at the desk. She was sitting in her bluish-gray office chair, looking at its spreadsheet with some Windows XP desktop that they've had since 2008. There was a sign-in sheet on the corner in front of me. "I have an appointment with Dr. Priebus," I asked. "What time?" 12:30, I replied. She began typing something on her keyboard. "Ah, yes," she responded. "Gary Johnson?" "Mm-hmm." "Yes, I'll tell the doctor. Please, fill this out." She handed me a clipboard which held a simple fill-out form. I walked back to the waiting area, took a seat, and began to fill out the form. I was about halfway done filling out all my information when I slumped back in my chair. I hadn't gotten much sleep the night prior, and I was exhausted. As I slumped back, I noticed something peculiar. My head never hit the wall. In fact, it felt like it went in the wall. I got up quite frightened and looked at the wall. Nothing. Not a single hole or dent. Nothing had been made when my head hit the wall. So, I reached out to touch the wall, and my fingers went through it. I recoiled in shock. The hell was that? I thought, as I reached out to touch the wall again, only to find my fingers clipping through once more. Then, suddenly, I lost balance and tripped, fell directly through the wall. I fell face first onto some dirty tan carpeting. Upon getting back up, I realized that I was in a completely different room. Well, not really a room, per se. More a set of rooms, all of which had connected openings. The walls were covered in gross tan patterned wallpaper. There was also an overwhelming stench of moist carpet. I turned back around and tried to put my hand back through the wall. It wouldn't go through. Okay, what the fuck? I muttered. I looked back into the rooms. There were no windows, no doors, nothing on the walls. Other than that disgusting wallpaper, of course. It was completely empty, aside from a single plastic blue school chair. At this point, the only thing going through my mind was fear, and the repeating thought of "I need to leave" on loop in my head. I started running towards the rooms, desperately trying to find an exit, but to no avail. There was no exit. Was this to be my permanent location until I died? No. There had to be a way out. I wasn't going to be just left here, right? Eventually, someone would notice that I was gone. But no one did. Then, eventually in the distance, I heard footsteps. But not those of a human. At least, not a normal human. Alongside the footsteps was a gurgling snarl, like that of an angry animal. I began to run. I ran as fast as I could from whatever the hell was approaching me. I didn't want anything to do with it. I ran for what seemed like forever, but I was always put back in the same room I started. At least, it looked like the same room. Not that I could really tell them apart. So I sat down, defeated. A feeling of dread filled my body, and I started to cry. I'm gonna die here. I'm still here. I haven't left. I've accepted my fate. In fact, I actually can hear footsteps. I wonder who it is. The Invasion. Original author, unknown. I worked at a regular office building. Some minor accounting firm for a large corporation. Nothing remarkable. It was good pay and within walking distance, so I wasn't complaining. After a long night of watching TV and drinking, I woke up to an explosion somewhere off in the distance at 2 a.m. I knew something bad was happening in the city. It seemed like every possible siren was blaring. I had an awful feeling deep in my stomach. I remember dressing furiously and running out into the hall. I could hear dozens of people coming out from the streets screaming in terror, some in pain. Gunshots were ringing out everywhere. The very world seemed to be moving back and forth. I peeked out a hallway window, just enough to see outside. Hundreds of thousands of glowing orbs were moving across the sky, all in different directions. A steady flow seemed to be streaming upward out of a circular red aura. The aura seemed to be floating around a specific location off in the distance. I got down on my hands and knees and started crawling towards the staircase of the apartment building. I could smell death and smoke emanating from the street. All hell had broken loose down there. The explosions were climaxing. There was no pause between them anymore. I was completely alone and utterly terrified. After getting down the stairs and pushing open the emergency exit in the hallway, I stood up to see if it was clear through the small window. I could hear a man crying on the other side of the door, but he must have been just below my line of sight. I carefully reached for the door handle, but instead, I hit the door head first. I dazed in and out of consciousness. I could see muzzle flashes shining through the small window up to the ceiling. When I woke up, it was still dark outside, but it felt like more than a day had passed. The world was much quieter now, except for some distant explosions, only these sounded much further away. The ceiling was hit by some sort of vehicle, most likely a helicopter. The beam struck me directly as I was about to open the door. It got stuck on the wall before it could crush me. I crawled out of the rubble with very little problem, but my mind felt very numb. A small pool of blood formed where my head was laying, but after feeling around, I can confirm that most of the blood loss stopped during my rest. I crawled out of the alleyway, through a large hole left by the crash. My mind started to race. Part of it was telling me to be careful. Part of it telling me to find help as soon as possible. And another part was telling me to sit down and just give up. The alleyway was absolutely caked in blood. The sky was dark red, the same color as that aura. I seemed to be near the center of it. It expanded steadily outwards, in a slow but visible pace. Most of the blood had dried, yet there were still some fresh spots. I saw a few familiar faces in the corpses slumped up against the dumpster. I guess the entire apartment block had died in the alleyway. The smell was just overpowering, and the sight was absolutely numbing, and the silence around me was deafening. I peeked cautiously out onto the streets. Pools of blood filled every crater out there. There were even some organs floating in them, chunks of meat and bodies barely recognizable as human. All of this was strewn about. I stood in silence, looking at the pure carnage. The street was completely ruined. Rubble from the buildings and cars both blocked exits. Looking up, the only street lamp had a body hanging from it. I saw a single manhole cover between some wreckage, the upper half of a corpse and a crowbar laid next to it. Almost by instinct, I took it and started prying. I could hear movement somewhere off in front of me. I knew I wouldn't see a friendly face. I pried harder. The footsteps intensified. There was definitely more than one. I could hear inhuman gurgles coming from behind an overturned city bus. All of it was moving steadily towards me. Yet the manhole refused to budge. Then they came out. One at first, then a pair behind it, and then a crowd, all moving in my direction. The first one spotted me and hissed. Its red eyes locked onto me. The crowbar broke in half. Adrenaline surged through me as I sprinted with more power than I ever knew I had. I vaulted over an overturned Humvee, past piles of dead soldiers that those creatures had stacked near the machine gun nests. I heard an unearthly bull sounding roar out of the darkness, directly to my right in a dark alleyway. I didn't slow down to see what made it. I ran towards my office. Nothing made sense anymore. The office seemed to be the only safe place. I passed right by the bloody elevators and went straight to the stairs. I charged upwards until I couldn't move my legs anymore. When those stopped, I crawled. I slid into an old janitor's closet next to the staircase. I pushed a few crates in front of the door and sat down. Then I just passed out from exhaustion. When I woke up, it was daytime. After composing myself, I went outside and looked out one of the windows into the abyss that was once my home city. Entire skyscrapers were toppled like dominoes. Massive clouds of smoke rose from huge pits where the neighborhoods used to be. The few buildings that weren't on fire were ruined or completely destroyed. I could see the company's headquarters about 2 miles away. The steady stream of orbs was coming out of its center. What looked like millions of humanoid beings surged outwards from the building, slowly filling the surrounding streets. A dozen large creatures stood out from the crowd, steadily marching onwards. A helicopter lifted from the office roof, only to be swarmed by the orbs like some sort of bee. I turned my back as it crashed into another building. This world would never be the same. I found a dead guard with a pistol and a few magazines on him. I went back to the closet. That is where this story draws to a close. I have my gun trained on the door, the noises of those creatures emanating from down the staircase. I probably won't last very long, but I'm sure I'm going to take a few down as I go. It's funny, these 3 letters just repeat themselves in my head, over and over and over again. They were on our coffee mugs, our laptops, our pens. These 3 letters caused all of this, and I took part in it. They're even on the crate in front of the door blocking me in, displaying these 3 prominent letters proudly. U-A-C. Guys, I know you expressed your concerns before about doing such short stories, so I figured I'd do a bunch of them and put them together so it's one long thing, I guess. I don't know. But I'm going to thank my patrons now. Thank you, Paul Z, Mr. Swiston, Official Jerboa, Chaos X, JY, Pyromancer, and Hayden MH. Thank you for your support. I really appreciate it. If you want your name read out at the end of every video, go down to Patreon and join at the $10 or above tier. You can also get access to Patreon-only content that only you get to look at. Thank you.